Hey, everybody, we're live, and I'm really excited to be here and present. I'm going to promise to stick to my script. Vinny Lospinoso is our resident NFL Hall of Fame expert, and he brought this opportunity to interview these great gentlemen who are related to Charles Follis, the greatest pro football player ever, but probably somebody you didn't know about but should. And jumped at it, and I thought, wait a minute. I want Vinny to really get us started. So, Vinny, take it away, please.
Well, thank you very much, Zenny. Now, Charles W. Follis. Most people that hear that name probably don't think much of it. And this goes for both modern NFL fans, older NFL fans, and even fans of football in general. Even historians of the game don't really think much of it. But I'm here to tell you that everyone should think of Charles Follis in the same way that Jackie Robinson is for baseball. In fact, he predated Jackie by 45 years for his impact. Charles Follis was born in 1879, and when he played high school, college, and professional, no one was better. He was nicknamed the Black Cyclone. And when he got to the professional ranks, he was the first ever African-American to ever play the sport professionally. Played for the Shelby Blues of the Ohio League. He actually went above Branch Rickey in the depth chart. Yes, that Branch Rickey. And he was also exceptional at other sports too, particularly baseball, where he was the first ever catcher of the Negro Leagues. Branch Rickey, of course, saw other black athletes, but it was Charles Follis who he was so inspired by that when he became a general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers later in life, he signed Jackie Robinson. But we talk about Follis a lot as a player and what he meant for the game in terms of what people that saw him, people that knew about him. But Charles Follis himself was an activist first and a player second. And mind you, he was an exceptional football player. He was a football player so great that people all across town and outside of town came to watch him play. But he wanted to see other black athletes compete in this beautiful game. A game that got more popular because of him. A game that grew to more fans because of him. A game in the Ohio League also that would be the predecessor of the National Football League in a town that, if it wasn't for Canton lobbying to get the hall, could have potentially been where the Pro Football Hall of Fame was to this very day. But unfortunately, like him, Hutch Heffelfinger, John Brawley, and many other pre-NFLers, the voters of the Pro Football Hall of Fame don't refuse to induct him. They refuse to even give him the Ralph Hay Pioneer Award. But people like Follis deserve way more than that. They deserve the full treatment for what Follis meant on the game, the way he meant on society as a whole, and just the way we talk about the sport in general. You cannot tell the story of professional football, especially with how important, African Americans, how important it is for them. We talk about people like a Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, who should also be in the hall. But someone like Charles Follis, who predated all of them, set the tone for how the league is today and how the running back position is today. Even over a century later, you can never tell the story of professional football without Charles Follis. And for that, he absolutely deserves to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame with a bronze bust and all.
Vinny, introduce these great gentlemen.
And these are Herman Smith and Ralph Paulk, who are relatives of the great Charles Follis. They are two of the living descendants of him. Even though Charles never had any of his own children, Herman, I know that was your uncle. Ralph, I don't know you. Are you his brother or are you his cousin? Just making sure.
No. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ralph.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, loud and clear.
No, I'm not. I'm not a descendant or relative of Charles Follis. I am certainly an admirer. I spent 37 years as a sports writer, and most of those years covering the National Football League.
Wow.
And I've actually familiarized myself with Charles Follis way back in the early 1990s while I was working at the Akron Beacon Journal in Ohio. And I stumbled across this story many years ago, and I was writing a lot of different pieces on unknown Black athletes, at the time, and he was one of those athletes. So that's how I began to research and study Charles Follis, and that's dating some 27 years ago, obviously. But finally, when I got up with Herman and his brother Dwayne, they are the descendants of Charles Follis. We had one common goal. For a couple of decades, I had been considering writing a book about Charles Follis, and they had a lot of rich history, and it's something that became a passionate objective for them as well, is to get something about Charles Follis in a written fashion. So that's how we developed a relationship and got together and decided we were going to do that. And I think one of the things about Charles Follis, which made this an interesting topic, is not so much that he was the first Black football player, and actually he was the first professional athlete of any team sport. When you think about it, years and years, as you mentioned before Jackie Robinson. But I think the historical significance that he plays in African American history and just U.S. history, some of the things that he accomplished and some of the impact that he had, both socially and when it comes to athletics. So his story, I think, is grander than the fact that he is the first professional athlete or Black athlete in this country. I think what he did is he opened the stage for a lot of Black activists in particular, but I think he strengthens people's reserve to actually do more than actually imagined that they could do. And I think that's one of the things about Charles Follis you always remember.
Definitely,
I agree. It's funny. Yes, I'm the great nephew to Charles Follis, and I got a funny story to add to Ralph, how we know each other. Ralph, as he mentioned, he worked for the Akron Beacon Journal, and it's interesting. Back in those times, that's where we played high school football. So we didn't have what we have today, the beauty of what Zenny's providing and Vinny's providing, right? Mm-hmm. The beauty of it was to get your name into the highlight of this man here, Ralph Paulk, so he could write about you in black and white in the Akron Beacon Journal. Mm-hmm. So for us, we try to aspire to that. More touchdowns and more views, you got to be in the paper by Ralph Paulk. So it was funny, he was writing about us in back in the early 90s, and we didn't know that there was a correlation that we would soon meet years later, a couple of decades later, and laugh about that on the same mission and premise of bringing Charles Follis to the world.
I'm curious to know, how long has Mr. Follis' name been in popular culture before anybody decided or tried to get him in the Hall of Fame? And what I'm getting at is, it seems to me that, here I am in Fayette County, Georgia, and we have revelations of a whole Black town that was actually under Lake Lanier. We have story after story after story about how people who look like myself, Herman, Ralph, Vinny, you got a little bit of it, but but are falsely accused. Our stories not even told more often than not. And now it seems that there is a groundswell of effort in many places to stop that. Mm-hmm. But when did it become clear that Mr. Follis was out there, but no one was doing anything about it?
Good question.
If you don't mind, I think I want to tackle that question only because I have to preface by saying this. I think one of the things we have to understand is that the media as a whole, whether it's television, radio, or newspapers or print, pretty much ignored a lot of Black history. It's not just Charles Follis.
You mean white-owned media, right?
Well, not just that. I think the media in general. Wow. I think when we look at even predominantly Black-owned publications, we tend to overlook our own history. I mean, those things happen. Can we fault the media for that? You know, partly we can, but we also can fault educators and people who are supposed to know these things and teach them to our kids. You know, so and in some ways, we kind of blind ourselves by not seeking that knowledge. You know, reading a little more about stuff. So, but it's incumbent upon us, I think, and I felt this way personally when I first heard of Charles Follis. The first question is, why isn't this man in the Hall of Fame? That was my first question. And then what you have is misinformation or disinformation. People telling you who was the first football player to do this, and it wasn't Charles Follis. Who was the first? In essence, he was really the first coach. You know, but we had all these different names and variants about what was happening. The truth is never stranger than fact. I mean that's pretty much what happens here. But I think we're getting to a point now with all the different media outlets, including your network, you know, podcasts or radio. As you guys can understand, as you look at the media today, you can shape the truth any way you want to.
Definitely.
But one thing you can't shape is history. I mean, the facts of it. And the fact of the matter is that Charles Follis, you know, came along at a time where whatever he accomplished was not going to be exposed.
Right.
You know, so as the time went on, you know, it's up to us, you know, to put a spotlight on what he accomplished. And I think to get to your question you asked me before, I think back in the maybe early 90s, mid 90s, we start looking at different athletes, you know, were they the first professional cyclist, or, you know, it was the first professional hockey player, or what that may be. You know, I think these things start falling into place. And let's give credit to some of the modern day athletes who accomplished a lot of these different things and make you start wondering about Charles Follis. You know, so and I give great credit to someone like Arthur Ashe, who was way ahead of his time, who spent a lot of time trying to bring out and bring forth, you know, Black history, especially when it came to people like Charles Follis.
Herman, can you help us also in, as best you can, explaining how it was for us when Mr. Follis was coming up? Because there is the subconscious tendency to think that, okay, life was pretty much the same back then as it is now because we don't have a clear reference, right?
Sure.
But the reality is strikingly different. So, what did your forebearer, you know, experience such that his story would be covered up, or it was common for us to be treated that way back then?
Certainly. And thank you for that question, Zenny. For me, it's really personal, right? Because I carry the blood of these family members and these individuals that we're talking about today. So these stories and these I want to say atrocities that occurred with the family, we would hear about it at the dinner table firsthand. We would see the weeping and the crying from family members as how it affected us and how to deal with it as well. So I think a lot of people miss the time period that these events occurred. I mean, we're talking 1800s. We're talking during a time period where, in Charles's instance, just to play football, to become the first professional Black football player, he chose to move down to a sundown city. So we're all aware, and for those listeners that don't know what a sundown city is, that is a city where you, of a person of Black color or melanin, would be jailed or killed if the sun went down. So in Charles' instance, he took that responsibility on, knowing that he could be killed any day. And he moved to that city to become the first professional Black football player. And then, and the funny thing about that, Zenny, is imagine this: in the morning, you're allowed to live in the city. You can't eat at the restaurants there. You can't frequent any of the other establishments. but when the sun goes down, you live outside of the city for fear of your death or hanging or being killed. So I don't think individuals today, just like when you go to work, right? Most people go to work, you don't like the individual you sit next to, right? Your boss is he can be upsetting, or this person, they dress this way. But imagine waking up every day, going to work, clocking in, and don't know if you're going to clock out. So
it's insane. I can't even imagine.
It's very personal for me that individuals today, as you and Ralph and others are bringing to light, even in the Hall of Fame today, you ask the Yellow Jackets. I've talked to a few of them. They don't even know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I want to continue that, because for me, I remember when I was my first year of grad school at Cal, Berkeley, and Doe Library, which is this enormous library, about 8 stories high inside. And I went poking around the books because I realized I'd finished what I was reading. I was a little bored, anxious to the class. I had to give a presentation, so I just take my mind. I'm looking around. I found a book called Black Names in America. And my last name, Abraham, there are 3 names of those of us who were enslaved, like Johnson, for example, names that we adopted after being free, and then free names. And I found Abraham under the free name. And it shook me, because the story is, okay, we're all enslaved, but my point is, for all of us, there's a deeper story that, because we don't share our stories, and why that is, I don't know. Well, we're doing it now, of course, but you know, there are certain things that I cannot bring up. I don't want to go into too much detail, but in terms of questions, because a certain person doesn't want to talk about it. Okay. And I find that that's quite common for us, and it's jarring. And I'm wondering to what degree that has caused us our entire stories to be subordinated. That's making this work, you know, so important. You guys want to respond?
I think you make an interesting point, but I also want to note that I think what happens a lot, especially with Black families, is that we understand and may recognize what our history is or what it looked like back then. There's a tendency, I think, for a lot of us to try and move on from it, but it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to move on from it if you don't learn from it. And right. I think one of the things that I think for me personally, I think Herman and Dwayne, you know, look at it from a family standpoint, and as he mentioned, it's very personal to him. You know, but being, you know, I got a degree in journalism and history at Michigan State, and the way I look at things from a historical perspective, and that is, you know, how he shaped his time. You know, Charles Follis. If we can look back at that, the influence and the impact that he had, I think it's a lot easier to discuss what's going on now. You know, so that's we can kind of dwell on the negative about, you know, history, but I think young people today need to understand exactly what it meant and what specifically what Charles Follis meant to this history. You know, and to me, it goes beyond, you know, him as a football player, as a baseball player. A guy who, you know, excelled in track as well. You know, it really gets to the character of the man. And I think that's what Herman alluded to, is that it's how you handle yourself under certain pressures. We understand what Jackie Robinson went through. We understand even what Bill Russell went through with the Boston Celtics. You know, so we understand what Arthur Ashe went through, you know, in playing in the U.S. Open Finals and the Wimbledon Finals against Jimmy Connors and being abused, you know, with racial epithets. And we understand all that. And that's the Arthur Ashe thing is 1972, 1975. You know, so we're not talking, you know, the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. You know, so some of this history is relatively recent, but we can understand, we get people to understand through, I think in this book, it's as much a history book as it is a story about Charles Follis. It's about all that stuff, that he impacted.
Herman, you want to add to that?
Exactly. And to Savon, it's about the time period that he did these magnificent things in, right? Slavery, going to practice and seeing other individuals hung from trees. I mean, you can't imagine what was going through Charles's mind during that time frame. So other individuals, as you mentioned, Ralph, Arthur Ashe, Jackie Robinson, Jesse Owens, hey, we've all gone through it. We still go through it today, and it doesn't stop. It's just done in a different manner.
Right.
Yeah, to where it's disguised a little bit more. And to your point, Zenny, earlier, I think a lot of the issue is for Black America, when you continue to be beaten over the head, it becomes a numbing type situation for you, where you forget your history or don't want to talk about your history or don't find it significant that others won't even listen. And I bring that up because when I was a kid, we moved out to the suburb area, right? And we would discuss Charles in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade with individuals that didn't always look like us. And they would laugh at us. Nobody, we didn't have any, I couldn't tell them to Google it. I couldn't tell them to go here or go anywhere to do that. So it was us carrying that faith on our shoulders for them and for the family all these years. So it's a beauty that now we're able to get it out in a positive light and use Charles as the conduit to get the message out to the masses.
I got to ask too, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about the man and his exploits, because when someone says that someone else is the greatest, it means that they've done something, as opposed to just showing up. Mm-hmm. Herman, can you talk about his exploits?
Certainly.
And Vinny, if you want to add to, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Herman, why don't you take it away first?
Yeah, I'll just give you guys a quick example of that, of somebody that has actually witnessed seeing Charles play and witnessed players all the way up to 1975. Now, just imagine that right now today, that if we could even four of us find that type of individual and interview them today. But we have that on record, an individual that saw Charles and saw all the way to 1975. So when you talk about his exploits, this individual's, and I'm paraphrasing here, and it's in the book, he said, basically, there was no one better than Charles. And if he was alive today, he could play on any team. So that tells you right there today. Exactly. And this individual was actually interviewed by the Akron Beacon Journal. And we have that quote and actually a newspaper article in our book, Follis Greatness Transcends.
So is it fair to say that he's better than Jim Thorpe?
Yeah, he included Jim Thorpe. The only person that compared somewhat close to him was, he said Jim Brown. Is that correct? But he even said Charles was better than Jim Brown, better than Jim Thorpe, better than, Chuck Banderick, better than all these legendary names. And the one that he saw was the best from all the decades and decades he saw was Mr. Charles W. Follis.
Exactly, Vinny. And the beauty of this article was taken and interviewed in 1975. And he lived in Shelby, Ohio. So he witnessed Charles as well as all the players up to that decade of 75.
I think the one thing I'd like to add is that I think it's pretty clear how a great a football player or athlete and what a man Charles Follis must have been. When you think about he's played football in a sundown town, and I think if the census, if I'm reading the census right, there were, I think, 6 black people who lived in the town or in the surrounding area. Mm-hmm. And for the owner to go out of his way and make the equivalent of giving away 4 or 5 first-round draft picks, however you can look at this. He wanted this particular black football player on his team.
It's like Herschel Walker.
Exactly. I mean, I think to me, that story is more relevant than whether somebody saw him run the football and how good he was, because he played with pain. He played sometimes with a heavy heart, you know, when he lost a brother or things like that happen. You know, so there's a lot of different things here that I think, to me, when you just look at it from that standpoint, that a white owner was willing to take a chance to play him. It's just like the guy he played with, Bryce Rickey. He was willing to take a chance and knowing that Jackie Robinson was going to be one of the greatest baseball players of all time. You know, so that, you know, the X's and O's and how good our fans do, how powerful it was, to me, is kind of irrelevant when I think about that particular thing.
Right. And, you know, I've actually spoken to a few. I've told Herman this story. I spoke to a couple voters recently for the Hall of Fame. One of them had no idea who Charles Follis was. The other one was inspired. The first guy, his wife was interested especially. But the third one, I mentioned his name, and he tells me, but there's no film on him.
Right.
And I say to him, just because there's no film on him doesn't mean he isn't deserving, because there's so much evidence that points to him deserving not just the Ralph Hay Award, but a bronze bust in Canton, like some of these other people. And, you know, he was willing to listen, so I do appreciate that. I'm not going to say his name, but in general, it shows that I think a lot of the voters focus too much on the idea of like the quote unquote eye test or the film aspect. And one of my friends even emailed the hall, and he told me that, yeah, pre-NFLers are allowed, but he said that someone like Follis wasn't a truly important candidate because he didn't get those huge awards like some of the other ones did. And mind you, this is someone who actually works for the Hall of Fame that actually said this, that because he didn't get those big awards with him or Paul Scheffelfinger or whatnot, those other people didn't get those awards. Like, who cares? Like, when you say you're the first ever player, first ever black football player, people like him and Heffelfinger deserve, the Hay Award is a nice gesture, and I'd be very...
Did you remind this person that there was like no internet back then, and there was no, you know, corporation concept back then? And, you know,
I didn't say this to the person because my friend told me it. I told him that I wasn't very happy with what the person said. I didn't want to message him because I didn't want to just be angry, because I was pissed. I was really pissed when I heard that, because it's like, man, you're gonna, you be fine with the Hay Award, and the Hay Award's nice. Like, you know, Kenny Washington got it, and, you know, you had Bill Willis and Mary Motley get it too. So, and you had people, like I said, Motley and Willis, and even like the Sables and, you know, Art McNally get the award. So it doesn't prevent someone from getting the Hall of Fame later on. But in general, someone like Charles Follis, the Hay Award is fantastic. It will be a great stepping stone. But in my opinion, it should not be the end-all, be-all, nor should it be, okay, move on. Charles Follis, from what I've heard, what Herman knows, Zenny knows, Ralph knows, as soon as I heard this name, I say this guy deserves to be among the greats. I even told other players in the Hall. Randall McDaniel I told about, Carl Eller I spoke to him about, Andre Tippett I spoke about. They all said he deserves it. He said, if he was as good as us and if he set the stage for us, he deserves to be alongside with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Benny, if I can add, one of the things about covering the NFL, you know, as long as I did, you know, I spent a lot of time in Canton covering a lot of Hall of Fame induction ceremonies. And, you know, I've had plenty of conversation with folks who vote on these things, folks in Canton, you know, different sports writers all over the country. Mm-hmm. And no one has an opinion. And one opinion I have is that there are a number of folks, players in the Hall of Fame who are very good football players. But I can look at their name. I can probably tell you 15, 20 players in the league. I'm still asking myself, why are they in the Hall of Fame?
Mm-hmm. I see a lot more than that.
And it's very simple to me why they're in the Hall of Fame. Is that it comes to marketing, you know, PR, the influence that team owners have, the influence that certain media organizations have, even to some teams. Let me just throw it out there. I covered the Steelers for nearly a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pittsburgh Steelers, as you guys probably know, over the last 10, 15 years, the players I've had who have been inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Now, some may argue with me on this one, but I'm still trying to figure out why Jerome Bettis is in the Hall of Fame. Okay. So for me, if I'm looking at Charles Follis, comparing that to the impact that Jerome Bettis had, there's no argument here.
Yeah.
I think it's very simple that Charles Follis, his impact on the game and society, if we want to look at it that way, should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm just saying. Ray Chester. Yeah. I mean, I'm just singling him out. Yeah. Because to me, that's one of the more egregious ones. I mean, that's just me.
I mean, I think Jerome Bettis is deserving, but I would say that someone like, I'm still wondering why L.C. Greenwood hasn't gotten more attention. And if we're going to go with black pioneers for the Steelers, why doesn't Ray Kemp get more love?
Hey, let me ask a question of everyone, and particularly you, Ralph, because you're in the media. Have you approached anyone without using names who's black, who's in the current media?
You mean talk to about being in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, about Mr. Hollis, yeah.
Oh yeah, most folks I talk to about Charles Follis are not black, because the media is still predominantly a white media. I mean, that is that reality. Mm-hmm. But there's a gentleman at the Hall of Fame. You know him, Benny, Rick DeRozier. Actually, he was a colleague of mine at the Beacon Journal in Akron. He's now at the Hall of Fame, and he and I've had some conversations.
He was the one that emailed me.
Yeah, and he's a great guy, and I think that he's doing what he can to start a conversation, a real conversation.
Well, I asked because I'm gonna send this to my friend right now. Jared Bell's a good friend of mine, USA Today, and Dean Orlando, Ed Ledbetter's here in Atlanta. Mike Silver is with the San Francisco Chronicle. He and I went to Cal together. We grew up together. So, I mean, I know enough people to put this in their faces. And of all the people that I know, and I'll send it to Jim Trotter as well, they're in the best position to, start to do something about it.
Definitely. Ledbetter, I know for a fact, is a part of the senior committee. So that Bell, I know from what Bill Carroll told me, he is very high on Charles Follis. Jim Trotter, I've never heard him say anything about Charles Follis one way or another, but I guarantee he's probably in favor of it. As for others, like the three voters I mentioned are white. And as for the one that emailed me, Rich is the one that emailed me. That doesn't mean he doesn't think that Follis isn't deserving. He means like right now with the bylaws, which keep in mind they can easily be changed. They don't allow. But I will say one thing that really stuck out to me for why I especially want Charles Follis. But one person said, one of these pompous historians, I'm going to say pompous because I think he is pompous, on Twitter, got angry with me for pushing for Charles Follis, and he told me putting Charles Follis in the Hall of Fame would be a political statement.
Oh, get out of here. Jeez Louise, man.
I'm not joking. This person actually said that to me.
And what that person means is it'd be a black statement. Right. Everything is political.
Yep.
Okay. All right? I mean,
and that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
I know who said that too. It's like,
I know who said it for a fact. I'm not going to say it here, but I know who said it.
Yeah, that's the whole point about this conversation is that, it's all subjective as opposed to be dealing with the realities of it. It is politics. It is it's about who there is that. So really it's going to take, to be honest with you, it's going to take someone like, the Rooney family. It's going to take, Jerry Jones. It's going to take Robert Kraft.
Is rising. So
right. I mean, their impact, their influence on the league and on the Hall of Fame. Let's be honest. They may not be voting, but they do have sway.
Oh yeah.
So that's the kind of way this thing goes. But I think ultimately this is why the book is out there. Definitely. So we can educate the people who don't know, who don't understand it. So I think once people read the book and they understand both the talents of the man, but also who this person was, Yeah, he's not getting in just because, you know, he was the first black football player. Yeah, that helps. But the bottom line is he was a very talented football player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's a little, for me, it's a little deeper than that. It's in plain sight. It's just, if you give this credit and credence to Charles Follis, you're admitting in the eyes of football enthusiasts everywhere that he is the catalyst for this game in America.
Right.
He is the trailblazer and pioneer, and the reason why we have the Pro Hall football fame today. That's the reason for Charles. So if they put him in, we know back then that football was floundering. It was losing interest in America. I mean, until Charles came. So his impact to the game, where they were selling 200 to 500 tickets a game, maybe. Now they're selling 2,500 to 8,500, 10,000 tickets a game. So you have to imagine his impact on not just the game, but that city, like the Super Bowl does today. The revenue that it brings in that 1 year, that city today makes more than it makes the entire year.
Crazy.
That's what Charles brought to them back then. And that one day when he would play in their city, their hotel rooms, their restaurants would be filled and packed.
I know we've got like roughly 13 minutes. I want to ask a quick question. Have you considered fashioning the book into a movie or writing a treatment to get it optioned?
Great question, Zenny. Right now, yes. I mean, that's definitely in the thought process, and it will work for us. But as Ralph brought out, we wanted to get the book out to set the trend and set the conduit and lay the foreground for the things to come.
Yeah, when I actually shopped this idea around 20-some years ago, my book agent at the time suggested this is more of a movie than there's a book, but you can't do the movie justice without doing the book.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of like the whole reality of it, because I think a whole objective here is to educate people about Charles Follis and about the times in which he lived. So you can't really do a movie without dealing with the era in which he lived.
Can I push back a little bit on that? Because when I hear that, I read that as a stoppage. You can write a treatment. In fact, I suggest that you do so and then file it with Writers Guild of America West. $20. Treatment could be 6,000 words. These are things you can't just say, I can't. Because what happens is that I can't will translate into it'll never happen, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Put all those out there, because you don't want somebody saying, hey, did you write a treatment? You didn't. Or, hey, did you think about this and you didn't? And yet you have the book, right? You're saying we have to do the book first. A lot of, particularly in the movie industry, they're not going to pay attention to that. They're just going to move on. But if you got something for them to read an option, right? Because I've written a script. I wrote a script called The System. I'm not going to go a whole story about it. But I got lucky. The only mistake I made is I bugged the reader to death at William Morris. but my point is, this can be done, but I highly recommend you take the route of putting a treatment in just to mark your territory with the Writers Guild, and then take it from there and get an agent.
The only downside is that the strike's going on at the moment, but the writers, the WGA, and the producers, like Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, they're all like just battling with them right now. It's very hectic. The actors are doing the same thing, so that's why it's a little tricky. However,
there's a strike, but Vinny, the Writers Guild has not closed, so that is true. But
Herman,
just write it, file it. All right, the computer's up. You can file it, write it, and file it.
Is there a studio that you would prefer a movie get made by, or does it not matter? Would you prefer like a big studio, prefer an independent studio? And which one would you prefer mostly?
For us, number one, is a studio that sees our vision, right? It's going to do Charles Follis and our family and our story the justice it needs. the issues, and I'm glad you brought it up, Vinny, is we've had some inquiries, you know, in the past, and those things didn't come to fruition because of, just as I mentioned, our vision wasn't the forefront of the production. So again, these are the reasons why these stories, as you brought out earlier, Zenny, about 15 minutes ago, is that why these stories are never being told. You know, if it's not done a certain way or fit in this bucket, or we can't buy you out your rights or buy you out of your story and tell it our way, then we'll shelve it and we won't give you the platform. We won't give you the Zenny 62 shows and hook you up with the network and give you allow you to use the resources to get the story out. So for us, that's very important. So Vinny, to your question, we don't have a preference. It's more about seeing our vision and getting the true story out, because we believe the story itself, no matter if it's Paramount or if it's Joe Blow in the corner, it's going to resonate with the people once it hits the masses.
Definitely. As a guy who's done this before, I'm saying write that treatment and have, just like you're pitching, and this is for anybody watching in general, anybody, 25 words or less, right? And have something to send out there so that what you really need is you need a great spec script salesperson, like with CAA, which is Michael Ovitt's outfit. You know, a great person to reach out, and this is just off the top of my head, publicly, I think is Magic Johnson, because of his relationships, right? There are a number of us who are in that frame who can open a lot of doors in unusual ways.
Definitely.
You know, and so I'm on board. I'll help out.
Me too. I have some friends and some family.
We have to drag you along because I'm gonna get you some work out of this. Okay.
Oh, don't worry. I have some friends in screenwriting. I have some friends in acting, some family in acting too. I've always wanted to work with this stuff. Actually, before even I got interested in the football hall or the sports hall, I was always interested in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But the reason why I backed out of that is because you need tens of thousands of dollars just to put the star there. So I decided probably not that for a long time.
You need somebody. The people will pay for that though.
I know that's the only issue. And I would my friends, I would want to see Max Fleischer there, or some of those very old.
I don't know if you know this, but Zenny 62 Media is on the Academy press list.
Hey, that's another work for me too.
So like I said, young man, just we got you.
Thanks. I was saying Max Fleischer because I'm a big animation buff, but for Herman and for Ralph, what made you decide now would be the best time to release this book? In 2023.
I'll be right back. Hold on a second. You go ahead. I gotta.
Yeah, he's just helping out.
Yeah, he's
working on it, but I'll manage it from here, isn't he? But Herman, Ralph, what made you guys want to finally release the book now? What made 2023 the perfect time to finally release this book and show it to the masses?
I think the time is perfect now because we discussed earlier is that there are great opportunities to tell a story. There are more forums to tell a story than ever before. There's a lot of platforms to choose from. And I think you look at the times in which we live, Black history in particular has been, I think, greatly distorted. And before you get into, telling someone's story, you want to make sure it's right. And I think we can see, that, you can read the tea leaves on this one. I think it's one of those deals where the more and more, I think as time passes on, people know who Charles Follis is. But do they know the true story? And I think that's part of the motivation, for me is if you have the facts, you got to put them out there. And I think this is no time better than any, this is the best time there was, I think, as far as timing goes. This book, actually, as I mentioned to Herman and Dwayne many times before, I could have written this book 25 years ago, and it wouldn't be the same book. I think they delivered some things to this book, whether it's factual or some rich family history. You know, those kind of things that make it interesting. It's not just a football book anymore. I think what we need now isn't another sports book, but one that takes a figure like Charles Follis and deal with everything else that's going on in this country.
That's incredible. Herman, what do you have to add to that?
I agree totally. Right now is the time to do it, just because of, number one, I'm in technology. I'm in the IT field. So right now we have that tool at our exposure where we didn't have it before. As I mentioned, word of mouth back in the 70s, 60s, this didn't go further than the person sitting next to you. And that person probably didn't believe it. So yeah, right now is the perfect time, as Ralph mentioned, that basically his force, his historian background, his sports aptitude, his writing ability and knowledge, along with the family rich history together, it's time to bring this out to the masses. And with the COVID, be honest with you, that it kind of actually helped in a way, you know, kind of put everybody inside the house to where we thought about it more, and we saw other people, Vinny, actually trying to manipulate and monetize off of their false narrative and story and their portrayal of Charles. So we decided that it's time to put the true facts out about him. With Follis, greatness transcends.
That's amazing. Also, when it comes to Follis in general, one thing I also saw from people is that, and this is the same thing with Duke Slater when I was pushing for him back then. The reason why some people didn't want to push for Slater was because they thought, yeah, he did some stuff, but he doesn't have a family. Why would it matter? But, you know, like in this same case, you know, like Slater, Charles never had any of his own children, but, you know, but he had nieces and he had nephews. What was yours? Because you said was it your father's brother? Or was it my
grandfather is the youngest brother to Charles.
Did your grandfather ever tell you stories of how Charles was like as a boy? Did you ever see his brother play? What was, from your grandfather's experience, what was that like for him?
Well, you imagine it, like any little brother looking up to the big brother. It's like you're in amazement. That's your superhero. I mean, that's sort of like your example per se that you follow. So for my grandfather, Joe, who was the baby brother, and actually the interesting thing about this is where all the children come from. Charles's brothers and sisters is very scarce as far as family members. So even on our end, so for us, Joe was the catalyst to bringing the story alive. So as little children, we grow up in Wooster. We slept in the same rooms that Charles and Joe slept in. Wow. So we heard the stories. We heard them directly from Joe. We heard them directly from Joe's wife, Florence, who basically lived into the 1980s and was able to tell that story as the last Follis in Wooster. So for us, it was very compelling and inspiring, right? Incredible. Sit there and listen to these stories firsthand, and the things that he had to go through just for individuals today that don't even know his name.
Yeah. Also, when it comes to Follis's, story, he died relatively young in 1910. What was Joe's experience with that? And would you say that his very premature death is also a big reason why he's not as talked about also?
Certainly. I mean, like we talk about the time period and the actual value placed on a Black life back then, as opposed to what it equates to today, was literally nothing, even less than that. So for Joe, it was devastating. Here he's lost, I guess, his superhero in effect, right? And the oldest brother of the family. And that isn't Joe's only atrocity or brother that he lost. So for him to carry on a lineage in the bloodline of the family. He had a huge responsibility on his shoulders to deliver that message and continue the lineage of the Follis family.
Incredible. He would be so proud of both of you. Seriously, he really would. Herm, do you have any other siblings that have taken part of this, or is it mostly been an effort on your behalf?
Actually, like I mentioned, the family is very small. We come from one tree, Joe, the youngest brother. So a lot of those individuals have passed on. We had a lot of individuals that helped in the last few years that are no longer with us, that are no longer here to see the book released, but are actually pictured in the book, and we give credits to them and their efforts and impact on the story. But for the family, it's just very important that we stay focused and stay true to the lineage and those that sacrifice so much and are looking at us to carry that ball across the goal line.
Just like Charles did.
Just like Charles, just like Uncle did. Exactly.
Yeah. This is, folks, this is the website. We can go to right here, and I'm presenting the URL. charlesfollis.org. And if you're wondering what it looks like, it's actually something else. Congratulations on the presentation. It's right here. There. Who took that picture? What's the history behind that picture? It's amazing. Look at that. Beautiful.
That's interesting you brought that up. That is actually the first picture of Charles in 1899 in Wooster, Ohio High School, where he started football. They didn't have a program before this time period. And so this tells you the impact of a Black man in 1899 in Ohio, that he was able to get the community and not only these white players to follow him to create a program that still exists today.
That's powerful. That says something. That says actually that this was interracial at that time, and there's a whole nother story back there that it looks like isn't being told. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's actually being told in the book. I think this we have to, and we started this doing this project. I actually went to this town that he was born and he grew up in Cloverdale, Virginia, right outside Roanoke, Virginia, and traced back that whole migration of the Follis family from Cloverdale, Virginia to Ohio, to Wooster, Ohio. So yeah, this family has a rich tradition, and it actually starts in Virginia and kind of ends up here.
Something else.
It's incredible. And also, I also love the fact that he's the center of that, as he was the catalyst for all of it. Yeah. That I think is also very powerful.
And he was the only Black student at the school. Is that right, Herman?
That's correct. At the time, yes, he was.
Gentlemen, I hate to play referee, but I promised Mr. Smith I'd pay attention to his time. So Mr. Smith, you're my boss. How long do you want to go for, or is this the wrap-up stage?
I'm available for another 20 minutes here.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. I know it's 5 o'clock, and I didn't want him to get mad at me. So
perfect.
No, it's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Hey, so what also was it like to play football then? Was he two-way player?
Yes.
Offense, defense?
Yes, he was. Charles was, again, he was a two-way player. And as you'll read in the book, some say that he was even a better defensive player than he was offensive. So that speaks a lot and speaks volumes of who he was. He was more or less and Ralph can attest to here and speak more. More of a coach player, right? So he was doing both at the time.
I'm going to ask a question that's sensitive to what's happening right now. Colorado's being beaten by Oregon 21-0 headed into the half. When I think about Colorado, I think about Deion Sanders and Travis Hunter, who's still in the hospital. But I think about him because of the historic nature of what's happening now. but then also Mr. Follis and the fact that he was essentially the first Travis Hunter. Point I'm making is it seems like there's this groundswell of truth about the African-American athlete in football that's only coming to light. And back then you had a person who was a two-way player, not that any white counterpart wasn't, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that the story of these exploits has been so covered up that we didn't even think about looking in the past to see what the truth was. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you know, and Zenny, you make a great point. And I think from the one side, let's take a look at Charles Follis. He was a linebacker, a running back, and an assistant coach, really, with the Shelby football team, and maybe even as a coach at the high school football team. And what I like about Charles Follis is that in his era, he was able to impact the team, the community, with the way he handled himself and the way he played the game. But at the same time, he was still shackled some to actually express his freedoms or who he was. I think when you try to draw the parallel with him and Deion Sanders actually has more freedom to be more expressive, to be who he is, you know, without changing and trying to, you know, somehow be someone that he isn't. I'm not saying that Charles Follis, we really don't know, was trying to be someone else. But we do understand that you can't do what he did without having a very strong reserve, you know, and a resolve to be accomplished. And I think there are some parallels to make between the two. Is that I'm not worried that if Colorado loses this game to Oregon, let's face it, Deion Sanders already impacted college football in a tremendous way, the same way Charles Follis impacted the game, period, back then. They're going to change the game, and for the good and for the better. Because let's face it, people who look at Deion Sanders, look at his sons, and look at Travis Hunter, look at the program, college football was already beginning to evolve. At some point, there will be no NCAA. And at some point, you know, we're moving to these power conferences. It's going to take someone with a powerful personality that Deion Sanders has, you know, to be able to deal with it. You know, so he's changed a lot about the face of college football, the college athletics, period. Take that and go back more than a century and consider what Charles Follis had to do in those times. I would say it was even a greater, you know, responsibility and even greater accomplishment. Not to diminish what Deion or Jackie Robinson anyone did, but can you imagine a black man in 1899 whose parents or grandparents were enslaved, and now you say, hey, look, I'm going to change the game. I'm going to make this game happen here in Wooster. And I'm going to lead you. I'm going to show you the way. Can you imagine? I mean, so now we're coming out of an era where there still was no freedom. We were free, but we really weren't free. You know, now that we're still in the 1960s looking for civil rights and we're trying to find all voters' rights and all that. We're much more advanced now and have more rights, you know, with someone like Deion Sanders. But Deion Sanders, I think, is going to have tremendous impact the same way Charles Follis did. But I got to tell you, there's no Deion Sanders without Charles Follis.
Right. That's what's amazing about this again. You know, the story about how this photograph came about to me is one that everybody should know about because there's no color line here, right? Am I wrong?
Right.
It was Ohio, so it was Ohio. So like that because that was a union state, of course. But at the same time, Shelby was in that, like you said, it's a sundown state, it's a sundown city, so it's a bit of a different situation. Also, out of curiosity, you said, you know, his parents and grandparents were enslaved. Do you know the history of like where Follis's family begins in America? Do you happen to know that part of it, or no?
Yes, we do, and we lay that out in a very detailed manner in the book "Follis Greatness Transcends." Because, as you say, Vinny, that's a very important question that people want to know. Well, why did they move to Ohio?
Yeah.
What caused this family to leave Virginia and travel and come to Ohio? And we explain that in detail in the book. So, but it's very important that readers understand, once they read that, and understand why that migration took place back then.
Yeah. And I can't help but come back to this photograph, because I think about Emmett Till in 1955 being killed. I think about even, for example, in 2015, I'm at Raider headquarters for Jack Del Rio's press conference. And after the press conference, there were a group of us Black reporters all huddled together, not for that intent, it just happened that way. But one gentleman who I didn't know, because we were talking about the proceedings, said, "We can't be doing this." And I said, "Huh?" He said, "This." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "All of us together." And I said, I just said instinctively, I said, "Don't ever say that again. There's nothing wrong with us together." And the reason why I come back to this photograph is because of all the problems and punishments we've had for just being in an environment where there are white folks alongside of us as equals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I see this photograph and I'm saying, wait a minute, there's a story back there that gives us a key to what America was really like, which would seem to ask the question, how come we're not, separate from your book, but as a whole, telling that story? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you know what? I think what happened here too is, if you, in the book, we try to get our readers to understand what life was like in Wooster, Ohio, and this is where he found the football team. Say for the most part a deeply religious town, and the Follis family themselves, a deeply religious family. Everything they did was based on faith. And you have to have a strong faith to overcome some of the things they did and other families like theirs. So this is, I think, understanding the people in the community. And we have to give credit where credit is due. We can't say that, one group of people are all the same. One of the things we talk about in the book, from a historical standpoint, in Ohio, white folks didn't just dismiss black people; they also got rid of the Indians, and chased them out, to certain places. So this is, there are poor whites who couldn't live in the same area. So there's a lot of things going on here that, in many ways, brought the community, the black and white, together. There were times when they even went to the same church, actually, intermediate, did things together. You have a hard time getting that to happen right now, in America sometimes, under the climate in which we live in some ways. But I think more than anything else, even back then, and at the end of the 19th century, there was an attitude among blacks and whites, who I think, good-hearted people who wanted the best for everybody. Was everybody like that? No. I mean, that's just a reality. But I don't think you could see Charles Follis in the center of this picture if everyone pushed against it. So right. I think that kind of explains part of where we are.
Yeah, that's what makes this so powerful. I mean, it just screams story. Greatness transcends. And folks, I encourage you to buy the book here at the website. You can go and order it, and quite an achievement, gentlemen. Congratulations.
Seriously. Herman, you told me that the book did extremely well, and you said that on the phone with the mayor of Columbus, he said he absolutely loved it. Is that correct?
That's actually it was the mayor of Shelby.
Mayor of Shelby.
Which is he called it, and in quotes, a literary masterpiece. So right now in Shelby, they're basically promoting this with our flyers throughout the entire city. The mayor's doing all he can. He's got it up on his government official page. And as far as the book, it is doing very well nationally on Amazon. We were at one point up to number 9 nationally.
Whoa, wow.
And then on other avenues, we were also on the bestsellers list for new releases for Smashwords and other ebook platforms.
Incredible.
So we are grateful and honored that individuals are actually taking the book into consideration in our family story and in podcasts and platforms like yourself. We appreciate it all.
Hey, we may be the ones that promoted you, but you, Herman, and you, Ralph, were the ones that wrote this, in the words of the mayor of Shelby, a literary masterpiece. And, I don't know if you're going to do like a book tour, a signing tour in Ohio, but I'm in New York, so might be a bit for you to come over. But if you're ever able to, please, I would love to see that happen, because I was recently in Bookends in New Jersey, and that had lines across the back for when they have lots and lots of signage and people that have come in. If you could set up a day or a time anywhere there with them, I guarantee the status of Follis will only increase. You have nothing to lose, in my opinion.
Benny, thank you. That's exactly what we want to do. And, we can talk later on amongst ourselves and exchange those resources and definitely get that word out. Definitely.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
It's been an incredible moment. And Benny, again, congratulations to you for bringing this together.
It's an honor, Zenny. Thank you.
Yeah. And come on back again. Let's talk some more about Mr. Follis. Don't let this be the last time. So,
no.
Certainly. And here at the family, we appreciate everything, Benny. Thank you for the contact. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for pushing the narrative of Charles Follis before we even met.
I may not be a African American. However, there's one thing I'll always remember, especially as both of my parents have been school teachers the last 30 years. Regardless of the class or era or place of income that my parents have always taught, they're still children at the end of the day, and they've always wanted to treat them equally no matter. And if they are falling in life, they always want to do what they possibly could to help them out. In the same way with me, I want to do the same thing with people like Charles and many of their greats, whether they played or not, to get the recognition they deserve. And this is only the first step. I also would love to see you get even more context and speak with some more people that have say, because if it's the last thing I do, it's the last thing I'll do. We will all together, along with other people we meet along the way, to not only get Charles Follis just the Hay Award, but a bronze bust in Canton. Even if it's the last thing we do, it will be the last thing that we do. Charles Follis for the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Well said. Oh, by the way, Vinny, you might want to check your background. You might find something more interesting. Check out Hannibal. No, not that background.
Oh, that's there's a lot of things back here. This is just the best of my bedroom.
No, I mean historically, there may be a lot more black in your background than you realize.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this right here, actually, there's a poster I did.
Yeah.
It's 700,000 spoken language, 194 countries, 7 continents, be a polyglot today. And I show all these flags of all these countries, almost like a mask, like a eyeglass mask. And I show just how many different cultures there are. There's Israel, there's Bangladesh, there's Georgia, Germany, Norway, Jamaica. I have one for Egypt as well. So all these places all across the world that show, hey, listen, we all share this one planet. And people also say too that, history is written by the winners. I never thought that was an accurate statement, because whether you win or lose, history has its own different perspective. You can go in America and see one perspective of the Revolutionary War. You can go to the UK and see a different perspective of the Revolutionary War. I mean, those are two different perspectives. One's on the winning side, The other's on the losing side, but at the same time, they take away something from it. They lost the 13 colonies, but they still had the British Empire itself. It's a different perspective on the matter. Just because you lose a war doesn't mean that you can't rewrite the history. I think whether you win or lose, you will always have an impact in one way, shape, or form.
We're trying to write the history of Charles Follis.
And I like
that the folks in the UK, the folks in America somehow agree that he belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, they do. The ones I've spoken to from the UK say absolutely. Like everyone I've spoken to that that aren't a voter say yeah, absolutely. Like if we can all come together as a nation or as a world, I think we should all say that Charles Follis deserves to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And like I said, the Hay Award would be a great start, but like I said, he still needs that bus as well. And hopefully we get a movie made. I don't care if it's by Paramount Pictures or Columbia Pictures, or if it's like, I don't know, even if it's like A24 or like Joe Blow on the Street or something like that, it would still be an honor. And again,
or Spike Lee.
Imagine if we got Spike Lee to produce this. Oh my God. Or Will Smith. Like, I don't know, these amazing, black run producers. I would love to see a black director and or a black producer to do this, because this would truly be their story from the lens that Charles Follis had, what they want to do. I mean, if we were to get Spike Lee, I know that he's in Brooklyn. If you're able to get someone like a Spike Lee on board with this, oh my God. Oh my God, he's going to set up, a deal immediately.
Yeah,
I know you guys can do that.
But as Zenny said, though, you can make it happen. You don't have to hope that it happen. That's who we are. Yeah.
Here's another example. Like I compare this to two different examples. Like when Tommy Nobis died from the Atlanta Falcons, I encouraged fans of the team to really push him for the Hall of Fame. And he's been a semifinalist the last several years. But the reason why they haven't pushed for it is because they think they're going to lose regardless. And I think that's a very loser mentality, because you're only just kicking the can down the road hoping that someone else picks it up. Meanwhile, for the Cincinnati Bengals, another team that's been known for mostly fertility, not having many people in the Hall of Fame, Ken Riley died. And, I've mentioned his story many times. I know his son. I know about, fourth all time. He was moved from quarterback to cornerback because he was black. Unlike the Falcons fan base that sat on their hands and just said maybe that could happen, I don't know, we think we're going to fail. The Bengals fan base was active. They spoke about it a lot. They campaigned. They lobbied. And guess what? 2023, Mr. Kenneth Jerome Riley Sr. is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I have his card right here that my friend Paul got me, because I helped make this happen. And his family will tell you that. But even though I helped make it happen along with these other fans, I give a lot of credit to someone like a Ken Riley, because he is also a pioneer in many aspects for not being allowed to play a position he was great at because he was black. And, I also look back at Charles Follis. A person like Riley opens the door for Art Powell, who also was nominated, and he also brings the door for other Cincinnati Bengals players and also other greats from Ohio like Mr. Charles Follis.
And not to get the hook from Mr. Smith, I had to call it right there. And thank everybody. Gentlemen, stick around in the background. You don't have to move a muscle. Everybody, subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube. Bookmark our newest website, ZennyReport.com. Bookmark Zenny62blog.com. Bookmark OaklandNewsNowblog.com and bookmark OaklandNewsOnline.com. Like and subscribe this video, share it around, and that ends this broadcast. Gentlemen, you don't have to move a muscle. Ends the